Okay, so this is where things start to get a little more tricky for people because our primary concern is to tell whether an argument is good or bad. And we want to develop the skills and the tools to make that assessment. There's really three, but two primary considerations that you should have whenever you evaluate an argument. And most people only spend time focusing on the second one. But the first one is really what's most important, or I should say, unless you satisfy the first condition, the second one doesn't really matter. So the first condition is validity. All right, so back to terminology here for a second. In this class, we use the term valid to mean something very specific. Now, in casual conversation, somebody might say, that's a valid thought or a valid point, or his presentation was valid. None of those things make sense in a logic class, because in that sense, valid just means good or maybe relevant. That gets closer to our idea. But in our class, when we use the word valid, we are only describing arguments. And if we say that an argument is valid, we're not just saying that the argument's good. Actually, the argument could be bad even though it's valid. But we're saying something very precise about the argument. We're saying that the premises lead to the conclusion. Or saying it another way, the premises support the conclusion. And the idea of support here is rational. Another way you could say it is that this argument is such that the conclusion could be false only if one of the premises are false. Okay, so let's give a textbook style definition of what it means to be valid. An argument is valid if the premises, being true, guarantee that the conclusion is true. So let's talk about this just for a second. So let's say I said, look, the game is canceled. This is the conclusion. I want you to believe that the game is canceled. I want to go do something else tonight. You were wanting to go to the game. And I said, well, we shouldn't because the game is canceled. And you want to say, well, why should I believe that? All right, now I'm going to present an argument. I say, look, school policy says that if it rains, then the games are canceled. And furthermore, I just came in from the outside. I'm soaking wet because it rained. Is this a good argument? Well, I can tell you this. The argument is at least valid. And remember the definition of validity. If the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. And notice we have that here. If these two things are true, this has to be true. Notice that there's a relationship that exists. You might even call it like an invisible relationship between these things and this, such that when these are true, this has to be true. I don't even have to call the coach. I don't have to check the website. I don't have to really deal with anything to do with looking this up directly because I know these two other things, and those being true guarantee that this is true. Now that relationship doesn't always hold between statements. So let's just consider an example. Let's say you were going to start a new school club and say it was going to be a pet owners club. And you're getting together with your friends, you're making plans. Okay, we've got this pet owners club, but we should get a faculty advisor. We're required to have a faculty advisor for the club. And somebody says, let's contact Dr. Schmidley. You said, does he have a pet? Like, well, I've never heard him say that he has a pet, but I did hear him say that he has a dog. Now, if you know that I have a dog, do you know that I have a pet? Yes. Now you might be thinking, well, those things mean the same thing. They don't. Notice, it's possible for one to be true without the other. Is it possible that I have a dog? Let's say it this way. Is it possible that I have a pet, that's true, and yet possible that I don't have a dog? That statement being false? Yeah, it is. Two different statements. One can be true while the other's false. So they don't mean exactly the same thing, although we understand that there's a lot of overlap there. Okay, back to my example. If somebody told you Dr. Schmidley has a dog, therefore he has a pet, does knowing the first sentence guarantee the truth of the second? Yeah. Let's just flip it around. Let's say somebody said it the other way around. You were going to start a dog lovers club, and so you're looking for a faculty sponsor. And somebody said, let's call Dr. Schmidley because I heard him talking about how he loves pets. He's always had a pet. He never goes without having a pet. So he could be the advisor for our dog lovers club. All you to believe this, Dr. Schmidley has a dog on the basis of this premise. Dr. Schmidley has a pet. No. Notice how it's possible for it to be true that I have a pet, and still false that I have a dog. So that premise doesn't give you reason to accept the conclusion. Now, is it possible that I have a dog? Yeah. But the premise doesn't guarantee it. So that expression was not valid. The premise did not guarantee the conclusion. But in this particular example, the premises do guarantee the conclusion. Now notice, this could still be false, but how? Think about it for a second. How could this be false? If this was false, then one of these has to be false also. That's because this argument is valid. It's not possible for these to be true and this false. And right there, what I just said is not so much a concern about whether these are true, it's just a concern about whether this relationship exists between the premises and the conclusion. And in this example, it does. This is a valid argument. Now, there's going to be a second concern for being a good argument. It's possible that the conclusion is false, but notice it's if the premises are false as well. That's the second condition. So if we were to put up check boxes here, is the argument good? Well, the first thing we need to ask, is the argument valid? And if the answer is yes, we're not quite there yet. Second box, does the argument have true premises? If we have both of those, then we have our third vocabulary term for the day, which is the argument is sound, which is another word for saying good. Sound arguments are arguments that are valid and have true premises. And if you have a sound argument, you have a good